Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast in partnership with DataWorks, and it is my pleasure to have Chaz Giles on the show today. I'm in person in New York following Chaz's awesome speech yesterday at the AI Summit. He is the co-founder and CEO of Revea. Revea is a skincare company that uses AI machine learning to deliver personalized skincare products, and this is based on a person's individual biology. So really unique, fascinating concept. I was fortunate to obviously watch the speech and listen to the speech yesterday. But for those that don't know, Chaz spent just over 10 years working for Estée Lauder, Procter & Gamble, launched Revea with a co-founder about 4 years back. Self-confessed skincare geek. He's here in New York, as I said, as a speaker. Really good to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
No, pleasure. And it'd be great to understand a bit more. Kind of alluded to your background. You know, you've been in this space for a while, working for the likes of Estée Lauder and obviously Procter & Gamble. But what is your kind of? Can you give us a bit of a kind of journey of your background and ultimately what led you to conceive the idea for Revea?
For sure. I think like most things, hindsight's probably much more beneficial or much more gracious, I think, in terms of the career arc from that, because I think a lot of it was, for me, was really moving toward the things that just excite me and the things that I found interesting, and that was always building and solving problems. And so I started my career at Procter & Gamble. It was an amazing training ground. The things that you learn at a brand building company like Procter & Gamble are obviously the foundation of most things. I went from there actually to a very upstream group called FutureWorks, which was inside of Procter & Gamble, where we did a lot of the new business creation greenfield for the company. And so that was everything from trying to work on therapeutic and clean water delivery in bottom of the pyramid, rural places like very rural India and things like that.
Interesting.
All the way to, kind of thinking about how do you stretch brands like Tide and Mr. Clean into dry cleaning and laundry services, right, and car washes. And so that really was where it started to scratch the itch of, building and thinking about new concepts and bringing those to life. And I went from that over to venture investing with Citi Ventures, so the venture capital arm of Citibank. And that's what brought me out to Palo Alto, Silicon Valley. Did that for several years. Launched my first company, which is called Mom Trusted. It was a basically early education marketplace. And so this is when the Open Graph first opened up on the social side. Yep. It's when my kids were little. I was going through that challenge of finding preschool, things like that. And really, people were like, oh, I use Craigslist. And I was like, have you lost your effing mind? This is my daughter we're talking about, right? So that was really the first jump into, okay, there's a big problem. And I know a lot of people face something like this. So instead of complaining about it, how do we start to build it? And, learned a ton. Company still runs, exists. Didn't get, exactly where I wanted it to be. But was one of those that, that journey of being an entrepreneur was fascinating. Went from that actually over to Estée Lauder. I knew a few of the people there that were doing some interesting things, and we were kind of talking about what the future of CPG and consumer packaged goods was, and how technology was really starting to shape that. And so they asked me to come help them think about some of that from an innovation standpoint. And so I was there for about 6 or 7 years, really thinking about how to transform beauty overall and using new technology in that. And I think that was, I understood technology, I understood the consumer, I understood much of the things that were going on in that space, but it was the first time being a pure play in beauty. And Estée Lauder obviously is an amazing company and has done very well historically. And so all these things that really existed within that space, but continued to see gaps. Right, and continued to hear the same things coming up from consumers, and it was always around, kind of 3 basic questions, right? What's happening with my skin and my body, right, and why, and how do I take care of that? And even though there was lots of amazing products that we created and others created, no one could answer that. And this was the moment where you were starting to see a really interesting inflection point in machine learning and data science and diagnostics that was opening up kind of the next frontier. So if chips and physics and silicone was kind of, the last, several decades. I very much believe that, biology and chemistry is going to be the next several in terms of where technology goes and what really creates some interesting breakthroughs. And so we started to play and tinker around in that of what was possible. I was actually introduced to my co-founder through someone who now is one of our advisors, Dr. Joel Dudley, who ran precision medicine out of Mount Sinai. He then went over to Tempus, which did a whole lot of really interesting things on data and AI for oncology research and things like that. But he introduced my co-founder and I and said, the two of you need to talk, basically, right? Because my co-founder, Dr. Marstrand, was the chief data scientist of Leo Pharmaceutical. And so he had been working on really interesting diagnostics, working on, kind of how do you combine those diagnostics with ML and AI models to think about, treatment of dermatological solutions. And, I was thinking about very similar things of how do you create the model around using data and technology to fundamentally, kind of improve the consumer experience.
What a journey. And for people that don't know, your co-founder, is he Danish?
He's Danish, yeah. So he's in Copenhagen, based out of there. So we have kind of a satellite or subsidiary office in Copenhagen.
I see.
A beautiful place. And
it is a great place.
More so in spring and summer than necessarily right now.
Not in the winter.
Little dark, little cold right now.
It's absolutely freezing now.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll stay in California in the winter.
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to dig on your time when you were in Estée Lauder, and obviously with Procter & Gamble. You touched on something really interesting just a minute ago, where they are very established. They have deep pockets. They have a well-known presence. Launching in a space, I think you referenced, is a $100 billion industry. So it's huge. The opportunity is massive, but it is typically owned or dominated by a number of major players. How are you going to compete? Because obviously the technology, the concept, the product is fascinating. It's obviously doing very well. But what is the kind of go-to-market strategy, and how are you going to compete with guys that ultimately have tons of money and huge marketing teams, big go-to-market teams?
Yeah, for sure. I think the first thing is there's a very real pain point. So all of the big players with all the deep pockets, there's still a very significant number of consumers who aren't satisfied with the solutions that are out there today. Right? And so when you have that dynamic in the market, if you can fill that, there's still a gap, right? There's still an opportunity for you to come in and be able to deliver a better product, deliver a better experience for consumers. And I think beauty's a little bit different, and it's actually changed quite a bit over the last probably 10 to 15 years as we think about the distribution structures and things like that, where when you were through primarily retail department stores, control the counter, and everything was purchased in person, and that sales force, that distribution capability was basically a table stake of what you had to do to be able to participate in the industry. That made it much harder for small brands to be able to do that. In today's world, most of the big players are actually losing share, not to one another, but to indie brands, to small brands.
Interesting.
Because the consumer is looking for new, they're looking for innovation, and that hasn't historically come from the larger players. And if you look at the kind of acquisition path and the acquisitive nature, much of the growth of companies like L'Oreal and Estée Lauder and things like that have come from acquisitions of brands that have proven something very interesting in the market. And they've been able to now take that and put that in their machine of capability to grow that on a much larger scale. But that first, kind of start and the first value that was created was very much done at an early stage and kind of startup level. For us, with that said, none of that is easy.
No.
None of that is easy at all. And so beauty especially is a very, very noisy place. And I think with the move in pandemic and all of the rise in e-com, and that really forced a lot of the big players to up their capabilities in DTC because retail was shut down and their normal channels were shut. And so that really made the space cacophonous. And so now I think there is a lot of work to really think about expanding the distribution channels, different go-to-market strategies, because the tried and true, social, Instagram ads, things like that, the CACs on those across CPG have doubled, tripled. And this, as I talk to my investors and they look at their portfolio companies, they were like, it's outrageous right now in terms of what that is. And so, we've thought about that very differently. We have some advantage in the sense that our ability to give a consumer a tool and education and value, right, outside of the normal channel of what a skincare company can do with our diagnostic that allows you to scan skin, understand exactly what's going on underneath the surface. Those are things that never existed before. And so we have effectively a free tool that we can put out for consumers that really helps them in some very interesting ways and gives us a different way to think about that communication that isn't just magical ingredients inside of a bottle, which has been, much of the kind of skincare marketing game.
Yeah.
With that said, the other thing that we're definitely doing, and this was learning and kind of adjustments that we've had as we kind of went out into market, is we're really partnering with estheticians.
Okay.
And so because we know what we do is very advanced technically. And you sat through the presentation yesterday. Obviously, we went through a little bit geekier because we were in an AI summit, so we could really get into things like latent.
It was fascinating to see it. Yeah, it really was.
That we'd never talk about to a consumer of how you're using.
It'd blow their mind, I think.
Exactly. We wouldn't be that far, but it's a very complex technology.
Yeah.
And so not everyone can necessarily understand, or it's not as obvious of how can you measure something that's under the skin from my phone. Right?
Yeah.
But what we found, and we actually have a studio and store in San Francisco, where our lab is and all of these pieces, we started to bring in estheticians because in a world where beauty is in brick and mortar, services obviously play a really big role.
Yep.
And as you're walking down, like you're in Soho, you're in the Marina where our store is in San Francisco, whatever it might be, that idea of getting a facial, having an expert, with a consultation makes a lot of sense. And so we saw this very natural integration between a new technology that makes an expert like an esthetician even better at their job, and then gives them the ability to now customize and tailor the at-home treatments that they can give to their clients in a way that really builds credibility and trust because they understand skin, they understand how products work for that. We give them even more tools to be able to do that, and then give them an ability to actually deliver better results for their clients. And so this has been, a way that we're working really to think about distribution differently in a world that is just so noisy and kind of, the traditional channels.
That is different. And I guess as well, they're also your kind of speaker to the market as well, aren't they? So they can obviously simplify to their customers.
Absolutely,
exactly
right.
without scaring people off with all the you were talking about the RGB stuff yesterday was kind of blows your mind. If you were for people listening to this, and I know we will tag Revea in, how would you explain Revea to my nan, for example? How would you explain in layman's terms how it works?
Yeah, so I think in the simplest form, we're using cutting-edge technology and science to deliver very innovative formulations, right? And deliver formulations that are tuned for biology. And that could be an individual biology, or that could be they are more optimized based on all the understanding we have for very specific concerns. So it really is using the latest and greatest in technology and science and driving that into a formulation. For kind of that next level down then is we understand that skin is very different, right? Your and my skin is very different, and we have different concerns, we have different lifestyles, and we have very different biology. And so what we've done is been able to create a diagnostic tool that can help understand your individual skin needs, and then recommend the ingredients and formulations that are going to be optimal for you. Yeah. And so it really is just taking all of that knowledge and giving you a tool to be able to do that. So it's kind of like, what dermatologists, did historically and would come in and, give, very detailed analyses of skin in this, but we know not everyone has a dermatologist. Not everyone can reach a dermatologist. And quite frankly, like we have, equipment and understanding that even augments what a dermatologist can see and understand. And so, we're trying to kind of bring that to consumers.
Yeah, as I alluded to at the top of this, I was fortunate to sit through that yesterday, and I think everyone, yes, it was a very technically led discussion, but I think the concept and the problem and the use case you're trying to solve is needed, and equally for the larger companies, you obviously work for them, they don't really have that flexibility, right. Maybe the resources, but not the knowledge and the deep domain expertise that you do. I'm really interested, I know there were a number of startups yesterday. There was a lot of speeches around the AI piece, which is obviously kind of gathering some huge momentum, whether we're on the kind of top of a curve or the bottom of one, we don't know. But you've been involved in startups before, from an investor standpoint, equally launching Revea yourself. How would you what are the kind of key steps you need to take to ensure your startup's successful? 'Cause obviously there's a lot of people who listen to this who are either budding entrepreneurs or they are currently running their own business and they may be making mistakes, but what would you kind of advise, and how do you approach it?
It's a great question. I think first is probably not one formula, right?
Yeah.
And I think many of the formulas that have existed historically, they change. And kind of connected to our go-to-market conversation that we just had, right? The go-to-market strategy that was 7 years ago looks very, very different now. So I think from the biggest advice I give as I'm investing or as I think about starting things and running day to day, I think a lot of it is going to come down to a few buckets. The first one is just it's mindset. There's obviously a lot of conversation and discussion around mindset and just what does that mean and how you approach your days and kind of your years. But I think the understanding that starting something from nothing is really hard.
Yeah.
Right? And from the outside, it looks spectacular. It sounds amazing. It's all champagne and parties and bubbles and great exits and things like that. The reality is most days suck. Right?
Yeah.
And
you need to be okay with that.
And you have to be okay with that, right? And especially as the founder.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, there are 100 things that you're going to have to figure out, and maybe 75 of those or 25 of them and 75 you don't. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But you're tasked with figuring that out, and that is just you are chief problem solver, right? And so, I mean, let's be real. I had 90% of my operating capital in SVB.
Yeah. Wow.
I woke up one morning as I got on a plane.
Wow.
And as I'm landing, my phone is exploding. And, I had conversations that something were kind of maybe going down the night before. We had moved a little bit of capital for some just breathing room. And then I wake up and I look and I say, I can make payroll for the next 2 cycles. And then I have no idea. Did I just lose the last 3 years of work because...
Oh, wow.
How do you deal with something like that, right?
Yeah, how did you deal with that?
And then we were, our first round that we raised, I had term sheets down January 2020.
Okay, not ideal timing. Yeah.
Ideal timing, right? The world goes to zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
And loose term sheets get pulled because no one knows what the world is going. And you go, okay, now I was, 25, 30 days away from getting it started, moving, getting off the ground. And now, you step back and go, I have no idea what the world looks like. Yeah. Nor if any investment is moving in the next year. And it was another, 6 or 7 months before we put that back together. So it's these kind of things that, and those are the existential things that aren't the day-to-day, right? Yeah. I kind of quipped to one of my investors. I was like, it would be amazing if we can just deal with the hard shit that's usually associated with building a business instead of all these black swan events that continue to happen. So I think that first one, just mindset, just being okay with that and having a really thick skin and being able to be your own hype man or hype woman to get up every morning and just go tackle it. Right? Yeah. And it's not easy some days.
No, it's not. And look, I'm also in a very different entity, but as a co-founder myself, you kind of, you leave the relative comfort of corporate and you think, I'm going to become a founder. And then, you're right, you're making payroll, your first transactions, it's interesting you touch on those kind of big points because I've got a kind of a mentor that helps me kind of sanity check the decisions I make. Have you got the same kind of structures as someone in your...
For sure. Some of that comes with the more formal side and boards and things like that. Others are mentors that, this week I was having dinner with one of them who lives in New York. And you need that, right? You need those sanity checks that come in. So I think, I would say definitely mindset is one of those. I think, what we touched on before of just having conviction and really solving a real problem. Because if you're solving a problem, at the end of the day, it will work. Yeah. And your job is just to survive long enough to make that happen. And, I think that's the big thing. Many things in startups are not glorious. And Startup is, a combination of great ideas, great teams, great timing, which equates to luck in many ways. And you can't control for some of these. And so sometimes it is just about making that move and being relevant long enough where then the market understands it, or a distribution channel understands it, or pick whatever.
Yeah.
Big company, big retail, big brand, whatever, goes, I've been looking to solve this problem, and you're the exact vendor, or you're the company that I need to buy for this platform technology, and all of a sudden it's overnight success, right?
Yeah.
But that survival is oftentimes feels like you're kind of drowning, right? And so being able to do that and make those decisions. And then I think the third thing I would say is really surrounding yourself with good people and being comfortable in the decisions that you make. And what I mean, and the reason I put those two together, is having people that can, as you said, kind of alluded to in the mentor, and give you sanity checks that can check you in your thinking, that can tell you the emperor has no clothes on.
Yeah.
Right. And your ability to surround yourself with those people is really important. And then I think your ability to make decisions on people and teams quickly is also really important. I know you obviously spend a lot of time thinking about some of these things, but I think those are some of the hardest decisions to make, both in hiring and letting people go and changing as things work or don't work. But they can be so consuming, both for a team as well as for founders in those types of decisions. And but being able to make them and move on, both positively and negatively, is super important.
Yeah.
Because you have the team that still exists to be able to think about, and whether you're adding in or subtracting, and you have your own kind of mind share to be protective of, and that is the thing that none of us have as founders is time.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're completely right, and I think get the talent, the people, that piece right. And your business, they always say you want to hire people smarter than you, don't they? They want to say but actually get that wrong, then the time and how far that takes you back, it can break a business. And I'm interested to dig on that, because with obviously Revea growing now, and things ebb and flow over time, that's a natural kind of evolution of a business. But how important is it for you to kind of establish kind of some minimum standards, values now that you will then subsequently hire against? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I think always important.
Yeah.
They change, they shift. Yeah. Not the values; those obviously shouldn't change and shift too much. But I think the standards move and change as you learn more about the company, yourself, interactions. I think the first bar of that is at the co-founder level. Like, what do those interactions look like? How do you deal with adversity? How do you deal with the really trying times? And I think that sets a standard for how you interact with teams. And then it's a very old cliche around A people hire A people, and B players hire B players or C players, and but it does come true. And I think really holding that standard to who comes in is really hard. And we faced a lot of struggle with this during like the run up, go back probably 18 months ago, right? When you couldn't find someone in digital marketing, right? Someone that like basically made an Instagram post, was like, oh, I'm an expert in trying to command like a $400,000 salary, right? And
everyone's in marketing these days.
Yeah, and
they?
Obviously wasn't that bad, but like it was insane, right? Because this was in a pandemic, and so everyone from all the big players, it was just this huge sucking sound of vacuuming up all of the digital marketing talent, because everyone had to figure out their e-com game, right? Yep. And that's a really hard moment when you go, I need talent. I have constraints of what you can pay, how you can do this, but I also have growth targets, and so how do you think about those conflicts, right? And so being able to have a more principled approach in what is important, of who comes in, under what terms someone comes in, and the same thing of who stays, and under what terms does someone stay. And I had one of my investors that I respect a lot told me once, like, look, when you're hiring, there's probably 50% of the things that you can evaluate before, right? At the hiring moment.
Yep.
And the other half, you're going to figure out as they go.
Yeah.
So you have to look at it not of like, oh, I made this decision, it's a sunk cost, and now I live with these things, but rather this continual evolution of as the company moves and grows and changes, is the team right for that?
Yeah.
And I think that's hard, right? Especially when you care a lot about your team and your people.
Of course you do, yeah.
You know, understanding that the business needs ebb and flow, and so the team is going to ebb and flow and change and dynamic, but you know, people decisions are tricky.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, because I think someone who's right for you now might not be right for you down the line, but also may not be interested in that point of the journey.
Right.
They might be really interested and excited by this part, but actually when you become a larger organization or get acquired or whatever happens down the line, then their path may take a different, and they may be a future entrepreneur. And I know you're obviously in New York for the AI Summit, and I obviously touched on something really interesting just a minute ago about a lot of AI companies or AI-based companies. It's around timing. It's, are they solving a problem? And could it be luck? Is it opportunity? But how would you describe the current state of the kind of AI space at the moment? Because, you know, we've obviously had OpenAI news the last couple of weeks. We have obviously Google just released their new ChatGPT kind of rival yesterday. You know, how would you sum it up?
It's chaos.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
It's chaos.
Yeah,
like I obviously know it fairly well.
Yeah.
Right. I live in part of it. My co-founder is a PhD in bioinformatics, so biology meets data science.
Yep.
So you know, he's intimately involved in this, and he is geeking out to no end right now. And,
is he?
I mean, he looked up, and even being someone that is that talented and that deep in the space, he was like, the rate of change right now, he was like, it is mind blowing. Right. He's like, there's things that we knew would be possible. We thought it would probably be a 4 to 5 year horizon, and it's 6 months that they're coming up. And
the rate of change is
wild, right? And so I think that's the first thing. It is just chaos, right? From chaos comes a lot of opportunity. From chaos comes a lot of carnage, and so I think that idea of focus as you move through this, both for small and startups as well as for enterprise and big, is going to be really interesting. And I think the idea of what is your very unique proposition in the market is going to stay there, right? Because I think a lot of the AI tools that are being built, they're going to be a great feature somewhere, right? So it's, what is the staying power that's built around it. And then, as we talked a little bit yesterday in kind of the speech, I think much of it is going to be the data and the training models that exist, right? So the technology and the models are going to get faster and better and doing more amazing things. So it's, how do you take those models and make them incredibly specialized for an application? And I think that's where there's going to definitely be a lot of wins. I think there's a lot of caution in the things that we build and do. Even, you know, we were early to the game in a lot of respects on using some of the, you know, ML AI things in skincare for sure. And my co-founder was like, hey, some of these things that we built 18 months ago, he was like, as I watch these models, he was like, we probably have 24 months before they could be replicated on this.
Wow.
Right? And
so it was ahead of the game then, if you think actually how far ahead you were.
Yeah. I mean, we've been doing this for 4 years. Yeah. Right. So, you know, early is great sometimes. Early is painful other times. And so it's probably been a combination thereof. But I think the ability to step back and say, oh, we created something interesting at a startup level, like you have to be able to run at that rate of change. Yeah. And so that's some of the things that we're thinking about as, you know, we start to look at some of the Gen AI tools and integrating those into business practices. And I think it's going to be a matter of, we have products that are touched and created by AI, so instrumental in what we do. And then we have processes that are touched and enhanced by AI, which is just going to allow us to do more faster with a small team, right? Yeah. And to your point of how do you compete with the big players? Well, if you can do things that, you know, can take what it used to take a 20-person team to do, and that's one person that gives that oversight, or that's my co-founder building models and training them for 2 months to be able to now replicate that, you have a really distinct advantage.
It's about driving the efficiencies at every level, isn't it? If an AI or machine learning or the techniques and technologies can help you save time to spend more time on the interesting things and the product piece, then actually you're going to become far more effective for it.
Absolutely, and I think that's the other thing. I think that's going to be the challenge for some of the bigger players. And so I was having a conversation with a few people that I respect a lot this week, and they were in a couple of larger companies, and we're talking about some of their AI initiatives. Since I was speaking, they're like, "Oh, I'm doing these things, and I was leading and responsible for these pieces of AI." And I was like, "Oh, really interesting." And they're talking, and as they started to describe, it was, "Oh, we're partnered with here, we're building these things out in this way," and I had to take a step back, and I was kind of like, probably 75% of that is just going up in smoke, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much hype around, oh, we're going to bring AI to do this and to do that. And I think there's now a big rush by a lot of deep pockets in the corporates to kind of bring tools in, and a whole lot of people willing to talk about a tool they can bring in and sell them a tool. But I don't think all the tools are ready, nor do I think many people necessarily know what to do with them. And so I think there's probably a bit of caution in that as well, of like, figure out exactly what you want, understand how you're going to apply it, and then go look for those targeted kind of aspects. And I sit on the board of a school as well where my kids are at, and their head of school was talking about AI and how it's going to change learning. It was really interesting because I have this in day-to-day in startup, and then he was talking about it at an education level, and the advice I gave him was, yes, it's going to fundamentally change the game, but do I think this school and you as a head of school in the academic realm are probably going to be the ones that lead that charge and how AI kind of upends high school and middle school education? Probably not. It probably comes from somewhere else. So defining what things you could really use help from, and then looking for those in the market where someone has developed that, gives you a way to experiment.
Yeah.
Very focused versus how do we integrate AI into this? And I think that's a bit of a tale of what's happening right now, where everyone is in kind of in the rush to AI, and I'm often cautious when we even use AI, because a lot of it is ML or expert systems, and which isn't bad, right?
No,
it's
exactly.
just using data and transforming data to help make better decisions, make the business function, right? Like go farther, faster. And I think there's a range of those, but we definitely have some really amazing things and some really interesting hype cycles.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. And I also think if their own kind of data house isn't in order, then no amount of machine learning or AI tools or tech is going to help them. And actually, I read this interesting stat that 98% of the Fortune 500 earnings calls this year referenced AI in terms of their focus for the next year.
Yeah.
But what's also very interesting is the lack of talent that's available, and equally the people inside don't think they're ready. But obviously the CFOs or the C-suite think, we need AI. It's going to completely revolutionize our business. But it will be interesting to see where this ends, and I'm really keen to kind of close things off with what we can expect to see from you guys over the coming months. I know you're obviously here in New York at the moment, coming from obviously from the West Coast, and we will tag obviously Revea. There's I think yesterday you shared a QR code where people could actually start to play around with the tool. Yep. But what can you say in terms of what people can expect to see and hear from you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. I think the next several months are really interesting for us. We have a launch of a new product line coming out kind of February timeframe, and this will really be moving up into kind of the professional line as the work that we've talked with the estheticians, a new technology platform that we've been working on in collaboration with those estheticians that are coming out as well. And then we've really been working on a lot of the co-creation with our community.
Yep.
And so we have a really interesting Discord community where the work that we do in the lab and all these iterations of using data, we started to open that up. And we said, why not think about development and product development very differently and do that with our consumers? we're doing this with data, but why not do that live? And so we started to open that up and allow people to access, early formulations and give feedback, at the earliest stages of this process. And it's been really, really fun and really, really interesting because both for us as well as for our consumers and customers, because no one's been able to input into that before, right? As I said yesterday, skincare has been a one-way conversation.
You get the product and that's it. There's no way to feedback.
The brand says, great, here's my conversation. It comes in the form of a product. And maybe you leave a review, but why not think about that fundamentally differently, and why not invite people into the lab and under the tent, so to speak? And so those things I've been really, really excited about. And so if anyone kind of listening and hearing this is interested in those, definitely get at me in any of the ways that we're tagged. And we really, really are interested in transforming how skincare functions from top to bottom, and we bring a really interesting technology platform to do that. And we're kind of continue to grow that community of people who believe that there's more to kind of exist in skincare and honestly broader health, right? Just demanding more from these industries, because let's be real, like skincare is not cheap.
No,
it's not an inexpensive endeavor. So we think everyone should demand a little bit more from it, and that's what we're trying to deliver.
Well, look, you're doing some great stuff. I think, fortunately, seeing the presentation yesterday, understanding if people want to log on and have a look at some of the use cases and what you're doing, actually the technology is mind-blowing. Using phones, the RGB technology, and how that actually simulates into the biological makeup of someone's skin is kind of quite hard to get your head around. But I think the concept, the product, the business is great. It's been my pleasure to have you on. Thanks, Chaz. Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Cheers.